Finally, two new witnesses in the Nolan Wells case take a new turn. Pause on that for a second. Not new suspects, not new arrests. Witnesses, two people who were right there, on the water, on the 4th of July. And what they're saying doesn't line up with the story we've been told.
Finally, we have something to read. The United Cajun Navy has completed a 22-page analytical report where they examined photographs, videos, boat locations, coordinates, and social media statements in connection with Nolan Wells' disappearance. They provided that report to TMZ, and I have never run to read something so fast in my life. But I read the entire report. I've got the gist. We're going to break it down. Let's begin. For starters, the United Cajun Navy is a volunteer search and rescue organization that responds to natural disasters and missing person cases across the country. Following Nolan's disappearance, members of the organization reviewed photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, maps, and publicly available statements to reconstruct the timeline of what happened at Horn Island on July 4th. The result is this 22-page analytical report dated July 31st, 2026, titled Geospatial Timeline and Vessel Movement Analysis. Right away, the report lays out the question investigators were trying to answer. At what time did the key events happen? Which boats were present? Which boats moved? When did they move? Who was aboard them? When did the Triton begin taking on water? And finally, what happened between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the reported 4:31 departure of the boat he arrived on? Those questions become the framework for everything that follows. Then they outline how the evidence was organized. Before comparing photographs or building a timeline, the analysts organized the evidence into 4 categories. The first category includes things that can actually be seen in a photograph or video, like the boats, the shoreline, and where everything is positioned. The second category includes labels that were added to the images. Throughout the report, you'll see names like Boat Number 1, Boat X, Triton, and Palm Beach. Those labels allow investigators to follow the same boats from one photograph to the next. The third category is made up of documentary evidence, including emails, maps, and screenshots of social media posts. And the fourth category is analytical inference, where investigators compare multiple pieces of evidence to see whether they support the same conclusion. The first major finding focuses on a GPS location connected to the search. The report references a coordinate provided through the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. Investigators compared that coordinate with another map pin that had been submitted during the investigation. When they measured the distance between the two locations, they found they were only about 1.6 meters apart, roughly 5 feet. The report also references a second coordinate approximately 279 meters away, but doesn't identify what event that second location represents. With the search location established, investigators begin identifying the boats that appear throughout the photographs. To keep everything organized, they assigned each vessel a consistent label: Boat Number 1, Boat X, Boat Number 2, Boat Number 3, Palm Beach, and Triton. Throughout the report, those same labels appear again and again, allowing investigators to compare where each boat appears in one photograph versus another and document changes over time. Once the boats were identified, investigators started putting the day's events into chronological order. The earliest visual reference comes from a social media video displaying a time of approximately 3:23 p.m. A second video displays approximately 4:27 p.m. According to the information reviewed in the report, the Triton departed Horn Island at approximately 4:31 p.m. A shoreline photograph reportedly taken at 4:50 p.m. becomes the next major reference point. The report then incorporates statements describing activity around 5 p.m., a search planning coordinate documented at 6 p.m., and finally a witness statement describing observations made around 7:30 p.m. Piece by piece, investigators used those times to build the working timeline presented throughout the report. Once the timeline was in place, investigators compared the photographs. One of the changes they documented involved Boat Number 2, identified throughout the report as Frontier Bay. In earlier photographs, the boat appears anchored in one location, but by the time the 4:50 photograph was reportedly taken, it appears in a different position. Investigators also observed that Boat X appears in one configuration of boats but is absent in another, documenting another change in the arrangement of vessels visible that afternoon. The report also notes that Nolan may possibly appear somewhere within the 4:50 photograph, although investigators were unable to make a positive identification from the image alone. Another section of the report focuses on the Triton and when it may have begun taking on water. The analysts reviewed the photographs, videos, and other materials included in their investigation, but were unable to determine when that occurred. To answer that question, they recommend collecting additional electronic records from the boat, including GPS info, engine data, bilge pump history, and onboard photographs and videos, along with interviews from everyone who was on board. The report then compares several public statements made after Nolan disappeared. Matthew Lamp described a group that was nearly involved in a fight around 5 p.m. Melissa Thomas later responded, saying she believed the person being described was someone else. The report includes both statements as investigators continue comparing witness accounts with the photographs and videos collected during the investigation. The final statement comes from Caitlin Brocard, not sure how to pronounce that, who wrote that her group remained in the area until approximately 7:30 p.m. before leaving and that Nolan was nowhere in sight. Near the end of the report, investigators identify the evidence they believe would help complete the timeline. That includes confirming Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting, authenticating the original video showing the 3:23 and 4:27 timestamp, identifying Boat X and everyone aboard, verifying the Triton's reported departure using electronic records, and creating a complete passenger list for each vessel so those accounts can be compared with the photographs, videos, and other digital evidence. One thing I found interesting is that the report ends almost the same way it begins. It comes back to the timeline. Investigators write that the period between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the reported 4:31 departure remains the principal interval they're trying to reconstruct.
One of them says he saw a group almost fighting around 5 p.m. The other says she was anchored near those boats for hours after Nolan's friends left, and when she finally pulled away at 7:30 that evening, Nolan Wells was nowhere in sight. Think about what that means. An 18-year-old football player goes to a barrier island with his friends. His friends leave on a boat at 4:31 p.m. GPS confirms that. And now two witnesses place themselves at that same stretch of water, before and after the group left, and their accounts crack open a window of time that nobody can explain. This isn't about what happened to Nolan anymore. Everybody's already asking that. This is about what happened in those 3 hours after his friends drove away and before the sun went down on Horn Island. Because right now, nobody has answered that, and these two witnesses might be the reason someone finally has to. Let's get into it. The United Cajun Navy released a 22-page working analytical report, and inside that report are two names that most people scrolled right past: Matthew Lamp and Caitlin Brocard. Now, before I go any further, I need to be clear about something. This report is not an official law enforcement document. The United Cajun Navy's Vice President, Brian Trasher, said it plainly. Quote, "The report is not meant to point fingers or draw conclusions. They compiled photos, GPS data, social media statements, screenshots from videos taken on Horn Island that day, and tips sent in by the public. Then they organized it and sent it to the Jackson County District Attorney, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, and Nolan's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley. All parties confirmed receipt. So this is a civilian document. Treat it that way. But the details inside it deserve your full attention." Let's start with Matthew Lamp. Lamp says he was on a boat near Horn Island on July 4th, and according to his own Facebook posts, which were preserved by at least 3 separate people in screenshots, one of his passengers told him something troubling. That passenger said they were pretty certain Nolan was part of a group that was almost fighting around 5 p.m. Lamp wrote that the dispute appeared to be among the group themselves, not outsiders, not strangers, among themselves. He also noted that a blue-top Bertram left the area, quote, "pretty fast after the incident." Now, let that sit for a second. Nolan's best friend Warren Hudson told officials the group begged Nolan to get on the boat around 4:30 p.m. He said Nolan refused, said he wanted to stay behind, that he met a girl. The United Cajun Navy's report, based on GPS records, confirms the Triton, the boat Nolan arrived on, began moving at 4:31 p.m. That's verified. But Lamp's account puts some kind of physical confrontation, or near confrontation, at 5 p.m. That's 30 minutes after the boat already left. So here's the question. If Nolan's friends left at 4:31, how was Nolan part of a group almost fighting at 5? Was Lamp's passenger mistaken about the time? Was it a different person altogether? Or did something happen on that beach before the boat pulled away that the GPS data alone can't explain? Now, before you run with that, I have to give you the other side. Because a woman named Melissa Thomas responded directly to Lamp's post, and she said that wasn't Nolan. She said that was a different person in her party on a different boat entirely. She also said she spoke with Nolan's group, and one of them had, quote, an entire bottle of vodka in his hand. So which is it? Did Lamp's passenger see Nolan in a confrontation, or did they see a completely different young man and get it wrong? That question hasn't been resolved. And the United Cajun Navy's report itself classifies Lamp's statement as a low-confidence second-hand lead, not a verified event, and notes that the timing has not been reconciled with the 4:31 p.m. GPS movement. That's the discipline this case needs, and that's the discipline we're going to bring to every claim in this video. But Lamp's account is only half of the picture. Now let's talk about Caitlin Brochard, and this is where things get heavier. According to the United Cajun Navy report, Brochard was anchored near the same cluster of boats where Nolan's group had been. She took a photograph of the vessels. That photograph appears on page 12 of the report, showing 3 boats anchored side by side, noted as boat number 3, the Palm Beach, and the Triton. She was close enough to take a clear picture. And here's the detail that stops everything. According to the report, Brochard said that when her group left the island at 7:30 p.m., Nolan was, quote, nowhere in sight. I need you to understand the weight of that. The friends leave at 4:31. Brochard stays. She's in the same area. She's taking photos. She's watching the boats. She's there for 3 more hours. And in those 3 hours, she never sees Nolan Wells. If Nolan stayed behind voluntarily, like his friends say, where was he during those 3 hours? Was he somewhere else on the island? Had he already entered the water? Had something already happened to him? Brochard's account doesn't answer those questions, but it sharpens them in a way that nothing else has. Notice this. The geospatial timeline report identifies the core analytical question. And I'm paraphrasing from the document. What happened between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the 4:31 departure of the boat? The report calls it a material gap in the timeline. That gap is not a theory. It's not speculation. It is a documented absence of information. And Caitlin Brochard's statement stretches that gap from 4:31 p.m. all the way to 7:30 p.m. 3 hours. On an uninhabited barrier island where an 18-year-old was supposed to be waiting for a ride, and a woman who was right there says she never saw him. Here's the question we're sitting with today, and it's not the one most people are asking. Most people want to know how Nolan died. That's fair. That's human. But the question underneath that, the one investigators have to answer first, is this. When was the last time anyone can independently verify that Nolan Wells was alive and on that island? Because right now, that answer is not 4:30. It's not 5. It's not 7:30. Nobody knows. And until someone can answer that, everything else is noise. Now, the reason these witness statements matter so much right now is because of what we don't have. We don't have a cause of death. The independent autopsy commissioned by the Wells family was performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., the president of the National Medical Association and former chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C. His preliminary findings were released on July 22nd at the NAC National Convention in Chicago by the family's attorney, Ben Crump. And here's what Dr. Mitchell found, or rather, what he couldn't find. He listed the cause and manner of Nolan's death as undetermined pending investigation. He found no apparent lacerations, no fractures, no deep tissue injuries, but he also could not rule out foul play. His report specifically states, and Crump read this aloud, that, quote, this pathologist cannot rule out if any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Wells. There are reasons he couldn't be more definitive, and they're important. First, the body was decomposed. Nolan was in the water for roughly 2 days in the Mississippi Gulf heat before he was found by a park ranger on July 6th. Decomposition at that stage can obscure bruising on the skin surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. That's from the report. Second, parts of Nolan's throat, his internal neck structures, were not in the body when Dr. Mitchell received it. They had been retained by the state during the first autopsy, which is standard practice in pathology. But it meant Mitchell could not directly examine the airway or the lungs for the presence of water. He could not examine the stomach for gastric contents. And critically, he wrote, he could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. Third, the original toxicology results had not been received at the time of his examination. So let me separate the questions for you. Whether Nolan drowned is one question. Whether something happened to him before he entered the water is a completely different question, and right now neither one has been answered. Dr. Mitchell did find one thing that raised eyebrows: red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. Now, that could mean several things. Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, the chief medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas, who was not involved in this case, said it could represent decompositional changes. It could also be from blunt force injury to the back of the head and neck. Dr. Victor Whedon, a forensic sciences professor at George Washington University, said it could be lividity, which is blood pooling after death due to gravity. 3 possible explanations, no confirmed answer. And that's where we are. The state's autopsy is complete. But those results are sealed. They have not been made public. According to reports, official results will remain under seal until the case is presented to a grand jury. Ben Crump has publicly called for Dr. Mitchell to be allowed to present his findings before that grand jury as well. Now let me bring this back to the witnesses, because this is where the threads connect. If the cause of death were clear, the witness accounts would matter less. If the autopsy said drowning, accidental, case closed, then Lamp and Brochard would just be footnotes. Interesting, but not essential. But the cause of death is not clear. It's undetermined. And when a cause of death is undetermined, the timeline becomes everything. Who saw him? When they saw him? What he was doing? Whether he was alone? Whether there was a confrontation? Whether he was visible on a beach or already gone? Those details go from background noise to the foundation of the entire investigation. And right now, Matthew Lamp and Caitlin Brochard are holding pieces of that foundation. Notice this: the Cajun Navy report doesn't just document their statements, it also documents what still needs to be verified. It recommends that investigators request phone records, GPS data from additional vessels, and conduct separate witness interviews. It explicitly says readers should not interpret its recommendations as evidence that law enforcement either collected or failed to collect those materials. That's fair. We don't know what the sheriff's office has or hasn't done behind closed doors. But we do know what the family has heard, and it's almost nothing. Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wansley, said at the July 22nd press conference that it was heartbreaking and concerning to not have heard from local authorities. She said the last time she spoke to the sheriff's office was a day or two after Nolan's body was found on July 6th. That's over 2 weeks of silence before she said those words publicly, and as of today, the official results remain sealed. Think about that from a mother's perspective. Your son goes to an island, he doesn't come home, his body is found 2 days later, and then silence, for weeks, while the rest of the world debates what happened to your child on social media. Now, I need to address something else, because this case has not unfolded in a vacuum. It has unfolded on the internet, and the internet has made things worse. 3 people have been arrested on federal charges for threatening witnesses, a judge, and local officials connected to this investigation. None of the 3 appear to know Nolan, his family, or the boating group. They are strangers from Illinois, Ohio, and California who got swept up in social media outrage and crossed a legal line. Edward James Porter from Berwyn, Illinois, was charged with transmitting threatening communications after allegedly calling 2 witnesses on July 31st and threatening to kill them and their families. According to the federal complaint, he told one witness he knew their home address and then texted the address directly to them. He told another witness he would kill everyone present, including any police officers, and that he planned to dismember the body and put it in a suitcase. Investigators traced his phone through subpoenas served on Boost Mobile. A woman named Michelle Francine Edwards was charged after allegedly calling the George County Clerk's office 29 times and making bomb threats. A man named Dumars was charged with witness tampering after allegedly threatening Judge Ashley Cole, who is the stepmother of Nolan's friend Warren Hudson. Let me say this clearly. These arrests have nothing to do with what happened on Horn Island, but they have everything to do with why this case is so volatile. Attorney Russell Latino confirmed that Porter's targets included two members of the family of Bart Edmiston Jr., a 21-year-old University of Wyoming punter who was on Horn Island on July 4th. One of those family members is a witness in the investigation, and the investigation has been muddied by widespread misinformation. AI-generated images and videos have circulated as though they're real. Viral clips on TikTok have been shared as evidence of an assault when they haven't been verified. The atmosphere around this case is toxic, and it's making it harder for real witnesses, people like Lamp and Brochard, to be heard clearly. So let's cut through that noise right now. What do we actually know as fact? 1. Nolan Wells traveled to Horn Island with friends on July 4th. 2. His friend's boat, the Triton, left at 4:31 p.m. GPS confirms this. 3. His friends say he chose to stay behind. 4. His body was found on July 6th at the northwest tip of the island. 5. The independent autopsy lists his cause and manner of death as undetermined. 6. The state autopsy is complete but sealed pending grand jury proceedings. 7. A witness named Matthew Lamp reported a near fight around 5 p.m. involving someone a passenger believed was Nolan. That account has been disputed by another witness. 8. A witness named Caitlin Brochard says she was near the boats until 7:30 p.m. and that Nolan was nowhere in sight during that time. 9. 3 people unconnected to the case have been federally charged for threatening witnesses and officials. That's the foundation. Everything else right now is theory. But here's what I want you to sit with before we go deeper, because we are about to go deeper. The Cajun Navy's geospatial report uses a specific phrase. It calls Lamp and Brochard's statements documentary statements. That's a classification. It means they're text shown in correspondence or social media screenshots. They sit below direct visual observation and below source annotation in the evidence hierarchy. They're useful for hypothesis building, but they are not self-authenticating. So the question isn't just what did these witnesses say? The question is, has anyone verified what they said independently? Has law enforcement interviewed Lamp's passengers? Has anyone authenticated the timestamp on Brochard's photograph? Has anyone checked GPS data from Brochard's boat to confirm she was actually anchored where she says she was at 7:30? If the answer to those questions is yes, then these two witnesses may have just redefined the entire timeline of this case. If the answer is no, then we're still building on sand. And that's exactly why this moment matters. Now, I want to do something most people covering this case haven't done. I want to slow down and think about what it actually takes for a witness statement to matter in a case like this. Because there's a difference between what matters on social media and what matters in a courtroom. And if this case ever reaches a grand jury, and we know that's the direction it's heading, the question won't be, what did Matthew Lamp post on Facebook? The question will be, can his account survive scrutiny? Let me walk you through it. In criminal investigations, witness statements are weighted by proximity, consistency, corroboration, and independence. Proximity means how close were you to what you say you saw. Consistency means has your account changed over time or stayed the same. Corroboration means does anything else, any photograph, any GPS ping, any other witness back up your version. And independence means do you have a reason to shade your account one way or another? Are you connected to anyone involved? Now apply that to Lamp. His proximity is indirect. He wasn't the one who saw the confrontation. His passenger was. That makes it hearsay in most legal contexts. It's a second-hand observation filtered through someone else's memory on a crowded holiday weekend on an island full of boats and strangers. His consistency is hard to evaluate because his original statement was a Facebook post, not a sworn interview, and his corroboration is weak because another witness, Melissa Thomas, directly contradicted him and said the person his passenger saw wasn't Nolan at all. Does that mean Lamp is lying? No, it means his account, as it stands right now, wouldn't carry much weight in front of a grand jury unless investigators can independently verify it, unless they can talk to the passenger directly, unless they can find a photograph or a video from that 5 p.m. window that shows what actually happened. Now apply the same framework to Brochard, and notice how different it looks. Brochard's proximity is direct. She says she was there. She's not relaying someone else's account. She's saying, I was anchored near those boats. I took photographs. I stayed until 7:30. And I never saw him. Her consistency, as far as we know, hasn't shifted. Her statement in the Cajun Navy report matches what she reportedly told investigators. Her corroboration includes at least one photograph that appears in the report on page 12. If investigators can verify the metadata on that image, the timestamp, the GPS coordinates embedded in the file, that's a strong piece of supporting evidence. And her independence, as far as public reporting shows, she has no known connection to Nolan, his friends, or their families. So if you're weighing these two witnesses, Brochard's account is structurally stronger, not because it's more dramatic, not because it tells a better story, but because it meets more of the criteria that investigators actually use. And her account raises a question that no one has been able to answer. If Nolan stayed behind voluntarily at 4:31 and Brochard was in the same area until 7:30, how is it possible that she never saw him? Horn Island's western tip is not a sprawling landscape. It's a narrow strip of sand. You can see from one side to the other. If an 18-year-old man was walking around, swimming, sitting on the beach, waiting for someone to pick him up, you'd see him, especially if you were anchored right there for 3 hours. Unless he wasn't there anymore. And that's the sentence that should keep everyone up at night. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. Either Nolan left the island on another boat that nobody has identified, or he entered the water before Brochard arrived, or shortly after, and was already in distress, or worse. Or something happened to him that removed him from plain sight. Each of those possibilities leads somewhere very different, and not one of them has been confirmed or eliminated. Now, I said earlier that when a cause of death is undetermined, the timeline becomes everything. Let me show you why that's especially true in water recovery cases. Dr. Victor Whedon, the forensic sciences professor I mentioned earlier, has written extensively about the challenges of determining cause of death in bodies recovered from water, and the central problem is this: drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion. There is no single test, no single finding, no single marker that definitively proves someone drowned. You diagnose drowning by ruling out everything else. No trauma, no toxicology, no underlying medical condition, no evidence of restraint or assault. Once you've excluded all other possibilities, you're left with drowning. But here's the problem with this case. Dr. Mitchell couldn't exclude everything else. He couldn't examine the neck structures. He couldn't examine the airway. He found that red discoloration at the back of the head, and decomposition had progressed far enough to make surface examination unreliable. So the state's autopsy becomes the controlling document, and those results are sealed. Which means the public, the family, and anyone trying to understand this case is operating with half the information. We have the independent autopsy that says undetermined. We don't have the state's conclusion. We don't know if they found something Mitchell couldn't. We don't know if they agree or disagree. And until those results are unsealed, everything hangs in suspension. But here's what doesn't hang in suspension: the witness accounts. Those exist now. They're documented. They've been submitted to the DA and the sheriff, and they create an obligation. Because if Brochard was there until 7:30 and never saw Nolan, then investigators have to answer a simple question: where was he? Not where do we think he was, not where might he have been, where was he? Confirmed, verified, documented. If they can't answer that, then the timeline has a 3-hour hole in it. And a 3-hour hole in a death investigation is not a gap, it's a crisis. Notice this: the Cajun Navy report makes a recommendation that I think is worth reading to you directly. It recommends that investigators obtain cell tower data and GPS records from all vessels known to be in the area between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. on July 4th. Not just the Triton, not just the boats we already know about, all of them. Because here's what cell tower data can do. It can tell you which phones were in range of that island during that window. It can tell you when those phones arrived and when they left. And if Nolan's phone was still pinging a tower on Horn Island at 6:30, that changes the entire shape of this investigation. If his phone stopped pinging at 4:31, that tells a different story. And if his phone was never recovered, which is the case, then the carrier records become the only way to reconstruct his digital footprint after his friends left. Has that been done? We don't know. The investigation is active. The sheriff's office has not disclosed what evidence they've collected or what leads they've followed, and that silence, while legally appropriate, is part of what's driving the frustration. Now, let's talk about the family. Because in all of this, in the witness statements, the autopsy findings, the federal arrests, the social media chaos, there are real people at the center of this who are living through the worst thing that can happen to a parent. Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley buried their 18-year-old son. He had just graduated from East Central High School. He was supposed to start the next chapter of his life, and instead, his mother stood at a podium in Chicago next to Ben Crump and asked the country to pay attention. She didn't ask for vengeance. She didn't ask for a predetermined outcome. She asked for transparency, she asked for answers, and she asked for her son to be treated with the same urgency and care that any parent would want for their child. Ben Crump, speaking on behalf of the family, has called for the state autopsy results to be released publicly. He's called for Dr. Mitchell to be allowed to present his findings before the grand jury. He's called for an independent federal investigation. And he's drawn a direct comparison to other cases where young black men died under unclear circumstances, and the investigative process moved slowly or not at all. Whether you agree with that framing or not, here is what is not debatable. The family has received almost no communication from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office since early July. That's not a claim from social media. That's from Christine Wells Wansley's own words at a nationally televised press conference. And in a case this high profile, with this many unanswered questions, silence from the investigating agency doesn't build confidence, it erodes it. Now, I also want to be fair to the other side, because there are people in this case whose lives have been destroyed by accusations that haven't been proven. Warren Hudson, Bart Edmiston Jr., the other young men who were on that boat. None of them have been charged with a crime. None of them have been named as suspects by law enforcement. Warren Hudson's stepmother is a sitting judge who has received federal threats. Bart Edmiston's family members have been threatened with murder and dismemberment by a stranger in Illinois who found their phone numbers online. These are real consequences. And they're happening to people who, as of this moment, are witnesses, not defendants. Russell Latino, the attorney representing members of the boating group, has said his clients cooperated with investigators from the beginning. He said they provided statements. He's pointed to the GPS data as proof that his client's account of the timeline is accurate, and he has warned that the level of public harassment directed at his clients is unprecedented and dangerous. To be fair, Latino hasn't addressed the specific gap that Brochard's statement creates. He hasn't explained why a witness who was anchored nearby for 3 hours never saw Nolan on the beach. But he also hasn't been asked that question in a formal legal proceeding yet. And until he is, we should note the absence without filling it with assumption. That's the discipline. Now, let me bring it all the way back. Remember Brochard's photograph from page 12 of the report? The one showing 3 boats anchored side by side? That image is more than a snapshot. It's a piece of physical evidence with metadata. A timestamp, GPS coordinates, camera identification. If investigators authenticate that photograph, and if it confirms Brochard was where she says she was at the time she says she was there, then her statement moves from a documentary lead to corroborated testimony. And corroborated testimony from an independent witness who was present for 3 hours after the group left is the kind of evidence that reshapes investigations. It doesn't tell us what happened to Nolan, but it tells us where he wasn't. And sometimes, knowing where someone wasn't is the key to figuring out what happened to them. Here is where things stand legally as of right now. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office investigation remains active and open. The state autopsy is complete but sealed. Official results will not be released until the case is presented to a grand jury. No date for that grand jury presentation has been publicly announced. The independent autopsy lists cause and manner of death as undetermined pending investigation. No criminal charges have been filed in connection with Nolan's death. 3 individuals unconnected to the case have been charged federally for threatening witnesses and officials. The United Cajun Navy's report has been submitted to the DA and the Sheriff's Office. And 2 witnesses, Matthew Lamp and Caitlin Brochard, have placed themselves on or near Horn Island during a window of time that remains unexplained. The community in Moss Point and across the Mississippi Gulf Coast has held vigils for Nolan. His family has asked supporters to wear white in his memory. A GoFundMe campaign to support the family and fund independent investigation has raised significant donations, and every week the pressure on local officials to provide answers grows louder. But pressure is not evidence, and outrage is not justice. Justice is a process. It's slow, it's frustrating, and in this case, it hasn't even really started yet. Because until a grand jury hears this evidence, until the state autopsy is unsealed, until investigators answer the question of where Nolan Wells was between 4:31 and 7:30 p.m. on July 4th, we are all still waiting. And so is his mother. Christine Wells Wansley said something at that press conference that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said she just wants to know what happened to her baby. Not what people think happened, not what the internet decided happened. What actually happened? The facts, the evidence, the truth. That's not an unreasonable thing to ask. That's the bare minimum any mother should expect when her child doesn't come home. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He loved football. He had just graduated high school. He went to an island with people he trusted on the 4th of July, and he never came back. The question from the beginning of this video was not how did Nolan die? It was when was the last time anyone can independently verify that Nolan Wells was alive and on that island? As of today, nobody has answered that. And until someone does, this case is not closed, it's not resolved, it is wide open. We will keep following this until there are real answers. If this case matters to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next update. We're covering every development as it happens. And I want to leave you with one question. Now that you've heard what Lamp reported and what Brochard observed, what stands out to you most? Drop it in the comments. Because sometimes the thing that doesn't add up for you is the same thing that doesn't add up for an investigator. And in a case like this, every question matters. Until next time. That's the full script. Let me know if you'd like any revisions or adjustments.